takes quite a lot of time to build up an effective portfolio. You don't, as I said, you don't just switch it on and go on in April. So to really shop around, find those sites. And then if you are going to try and, if you want your outdoor to be the best it possibly can be, which I don't think ours is just yet, we're constantly sort of learning and improving, to go and physically visit every single site and see if you can customize the messaging to its environment and, making sure that your font is big enough to be visible. And all of these lessons, I think there's quite a lot of bad outdoor out there in the market where I think people haven't physically gone to see their own sites.
Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Billboard. We are joined today by a guest to discuss our client's point of view of out-of-home series. In this series, we've had brands such as F&B, ABSA, Melon Mobile, MTN, Mondelez, Nando's, Beiersdorf, Telesure, and Pineapple join us to discuss their view on out-of-home. And if you haven't listened to any of these episodes yet, please do so. It's a great way to get the inside track to understand what are clients and brands thinking and feeling about out-of-home. Today, we're very excited to welcome our guest, who is our first client in the automotive category. We're excited to welcome Bridget Harpur, who is the head of marketing at VW South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bridget.
Thanks a lot for having me.
We are so excited to get into your view of out-of-home and all things out-of-home on this episode. But before we do that, I wanted to just say a huge congratulations to the VW brand for announcing their partnership with the Sharks. We are really excited that you guys are backing the bite and we can't wait to see how this partnership rolls out in the market.
Yeah, thanks very much. We're equally excited because I think Sharks have got this sort of almost like cult-like status in South Africa. So we're also super excited. And we got lots of out-of-home ambient ideas to throw into the mix for next year.
We love hearing that. I did see you tweeting on your LinkedIn, something's coming. And I thought, who is the brand partner going to be? So when we saw the announcement of the Sharks, I think the synergy of the brands plays really well together. So we're definitely going to keep our eye out for some of this out-of-home activity too. Before we get into today's topic for today, I wanted to ask you, we saw that you were also recently at the Cannes Festival. And I wanted to ask you, now that you've returned back to your normal life after this fabulous festival, I wanted to ask you, what are some of your highlights looking back, or what are the things that have kind of stayed with you since the trip? I think anybody in the marketing and advertising and media world, I think the Cannes Festival is on everybody's bucket list, just to go and experience the energy around the creativity and to be around such huge brands globally. So I don't know if you've got a highlight you can leave with us of your trip.
Absolutely. Look, it was a huge privilege to be there. I think that's the one thing one has to acknowledge. It's not something that you have, can expect to attend year after year. It was a huge honor to be there. And it was my first time as well. So I have nothing to benchmark it. I don't have previous Cannes festivals to benchmark it against. But I think, if I were to pick one thing, it was just the sheer scale of the thing, the level of speakers that they had. You've got Mark Ritson, you've got Oprah, you've got Gwyneth Paltrow, you've got all of these huge, huge names that have, such valuable messages and insights for us. I was honestly, I felt a little bit like it was a practice run. And now I'm saying to people, now I'm ready to go back to the real thing, because there was so much choice. It's actually completely overwhelming. At any one given time, there are probably about 15 different interactions, talks, panels, etc. that you could attend. It was just, such an experience.
It's just amazing to hear, as you mentioned, the scale is something that doesn't translate on social, right? When you see people going to different talks or pictures of where they're going, you don't realize the scale of the actual festival itself. So I think you painted a great picture, and also the celebs mixed in with the media and advertising celebrities as well. It's great to see, the exposure. You can sit down, as you mentioned, with Mark Ritson and then Oprah in the same day. That is just the most crazy experience.
Absolutely. And the celeb thing, it's interesting. I mean, obviously a lot of the celebs are there to hook you into attending a session. But the marketing celebs, I think for me, were the most exciting. All these people where you're listening to these podcasts on a weekly basis, or you've literally used their material like the marketing Bible, and then you get to see them in real life. Very exciting. Very exciting.
I want to get us into today's topic, which is discussing a client's point of view of out of home. And as I mentioned, you are the first client to join us in the automotive category. So we're really excited to have you with us today. And to get us into the episode, I wanted to find out from you, what role does out of home play in the marketing mix? We know from the Outdoor Auditor's recent report from February 2026 that the automotive category is the second largest category in terms of number of sites, as well as estimated rate card spend. So it is a hugely competitive category. We've all noticed different car brands popping up in the South African landscape, some brands going very big, some brands going very small, but either way, it's a hugely competitive category with a number of brands that are active. And I wanted to find out from a VW perspective, what role does out of home play for you, and why do you include out of home in your media mix?
First of all, I'd like to open by saying I am by no means or measures an outdoor expert at all. We've in fact, during COVID times when the motor industry completely, melted down, we had an outdoor hoarding and we reversed it just to, we sort of pulled back quite extensively on marketing spend. And in the last 18 months, we've started building up that portfolio again. I mean, as you know, it takes time. You can't just switch it on all in 1 month. So we sort of, we're back, but we're kind of new-ish to outdoor at scale. But to answer your questions, the huge spike, in my view, the huge spike that's come in the last 6 months in outdoor from the auto segment is from all of these new competitors that you mentioned. And I suppose from my point of view, why they would pick this as their lead, I think for a lot of the new competitors, all these new Chinese brands, there are approximately 24 new Chinese brands that have entered our market in the last 12 to 18 months. I suppose because outdoor buys you this immediate, huge awareness presence. So when you're unknown in the market, it's a great way to step into the market immediately with proper stature and proper presence. And I suppose Volkswagen in the past, we haven't suffered from an awareness issue. So outdoor has never been a lead channel for us. We're more about the emotional engagement. We add outdoor into our media mix because I think outdoor gives you a physicality that no other channel can give you. There's this sort of, so first of all, it's physical, it's in your face, and it's this repetitive, frequent exposure to the same message over and over again. So it buys you this extremely high attention relative to your media spend, if you were to compare it to digital or TV, and gives you this broad reach, but also in a close range to where your retail arm is, so close to in-store. So it gives you this really nice connection, high awareness, high attention with an immediate kind of retail trigger, which is very attractive from a commercial or sales point of view, makes it a very attractive media.
You touched on VW's campaigns focusing on the emotion, right? And I think we've all seen those ads that stay with us. I think each of us who have an affinity for particular lifestyle or particular car brand or type of car can think of a VW ad immediately. And I think that it's also so interesting to me that you mentioned you don't necessarily need out of home to do a brand building job because the brand is well known, but it's to bring that feeling, what is happening in the campaigns, into out of home with the emotion, I think is a great use of the medium. I also loved how, and I was going to ask, but you provided the answers that why have you come back onto out of home after a period of being off? And I think it's great how you've given us that loop around you wanting the emotion to come through in your campaigns, as well as creating awareness around dealerships and around sales and new models that are coming to market. So I love that you've woven that through. You've also touched on the competitive nature of the category at the moment. And I think that, a legacy brand such as VW has a lot of work that doesn't necessarily need to be done around brand building, but it does need to be done around continuing to have that presence in market. So I love to see that you guys are coming back in out of home. And thanks for painting, some insights around how the landscape is behaving at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. And I've learned quite a few lessons actually in this re-entry, and that is that, as I said, it takes quite a lot of time to build up an effective portfolio. You don't, as I said, you don't just switch it on and go on in April. So to really shop around, find those sites. And then if you are going to try and, if you want your outdoor to be the best it possibly can be, which I don't think ours is just yet, we're constantly sort of learning and improving, to go and physically visit every single site and see if you can customize the messaging to its environment, and, making sure that your font is big enough to be visible. And all of these lessons, I think there's quite a lot of bad outdoor out there in the market, where I think people haven't physically gone to see their own sites, and to see that, in fact, while I am fighting the traffic and all of these challenges between William Nicol and Jan Smuts, I couldn't understand your very complicated creative concept and your 23 words on your billboard and your 6 logos. And, it really is a very simplistic media, which we're learning. As I say, we are not experts and we haven't cracked it yet, but every sort of execution we do, I feel like we're getting better and learning some lessons in the execution. So it's been quite an exciting re-entry.
I think it's quite important that you've raised that key insight about rebuilding your holding, right? It isn't just I'm going to get it in April, I'm going to have sites and I'm going to go live and I'm going to add them to my holding. It is about identifying the sites that are applicable to your strategy or your location, geolocated to dealers, whatever that strategic purpose is of that specific format that you're using, and actually identifying, okay, these are the key sites when they come available, whether it's in 6 months, whether it's in 4 months, we want to be first in queue for those sites, and then start adding them to your holding. What I also loved is that, and that is the process. That is the process of building an incredible holding. If we look at some of the big out-of-home brands in the market, like a KFC, like Coca-Cola, they've been building and identifying a lot of their sites over so many years. And that's how they build some of their holdings. And I think it's really, really important to work very closely with your agency, which I know you do, and obviously media owners to be like, okay, that site, when it comes available, I want to be first in queue for that. We know that consumers in South Africa through Media Mastershare from Kantar, that they don't find out-of-home intrusive. They prefer to be communicated through the medium. Therefore, they are giving more attention to the medium in the landscape because they don't feel it's intrusive. They don't feel it's over targeted in their private space. And I love that you raised that about out of home being, this attention driver for you within your media mix. And then also, as Liv also, reiterated that you said is around being that driving that emotion of your campaigns into the field. So, it's very interesting for me that you raised the attention piece, because that's a conversation we're having a lot of in out of home. Is our out of home is a great attention driving medium in the strategies. And it's so good at that because it's so big, it's so bold, it drives the fame effect. And it's can, as you said, really be in your face. But you can have the best site, you can be in the best location, and it's not going to just be that drives that attention. It is going to be the creative, as you said. Like, you've got to hit that nail on the head when it comes to the creative, and simplicity works in out of home. So we've had a chief creative officer on the podcast before, a number of them, and they all speak about that simplicity in your messaging, reducing the number of copy. If you can just use a visual instead of the copy, where you can communicate it through a really powerful visual. So yes, you can have a great vacation on Winnie Mandela, but the creative is just so key. And I think you've really, really hit the nail on the head there. What I would love to know from you, Bridget, is how are you measuring the effectiveness of out of home with campaigns? Is it through like brand lift studies? Is it through direct, feet in store to dealerships? What is the way that you're finding? I mean, it obviously depends on why you're using out of home for the various campaigns that you're using it, but predominantly, what do you find is like your measurement metrics of success for the inclusion of out of home in your campaigns?
Well, I think for the campaigns that we've done, you can almost sort of split them into two different buckets. There's the static stuff and the spectaculars, the large format billboards, and those are sort of behaving as brand pieces where we're fighting for that mental availability. And there we would use our brand lift studies, which in all honesty, we can't attribute outdoor to this action and to this brand uplift. But then in the digital space, we've run a number of campaigns where, they measure the programmatically delivered messages, and then they measure the foot traffic into the dealerships, within 5 meters of a store, before and after campaign. So that's cool. I mean, it's always cool to see that kind of data point and to see that, there is an effectiveness to your work.
I don't think anybody has got the magical answer to proving attention or effectiveness from an out-of-home point of view. What I like that you've shared is that it's a combination. And I think even when we've discussed the same question with the digital experts that we've had join us before, the answer is it's a combination of different measurement metrics to understand how did the campaign perform. As you mentioned, you guys can look at brand lift studies. They might be looking back and they're not specifically only out-of-home related, but it's one of the elements that can be taken into account. I think the sales, and as you mentioned, sometimes you do loop online activity to what out-of-home activity might have taken place at the time. So I think everybody's trying to solve for the attention piece as well as for understanding how did the campaign work. It's more about understanding, as you've mentioned, what is available and how can you use those in combination to find out how did the campaign work or what was working about the campaign. You touched on it now around the dealership and the brand, and it made me think of a question around, we understand often with whether it's in kind of the fast food category or whether it's in the automotive category, you have this split between brand and dealership or brand and outlet, if you want to think about it in that way. And I wanted to ask you, how do the brands determine what portion of the marketing spend is split between brand building that the brand maybe funds and then dealership support? So we understand from our experience in the market that often there's a portion that each dealership or each store would need to put into the marketing pot to promote their own specific dealership. But from a brand level, how do you guys determine what budget would go towards the general marketing as well as dealer support? And is that kind of something that changes all the time? Does it depend on the campaign? Or is it completely split? You guys do the marketing and the dealers need to do their own branding.
So sort of a little mix of both. So our dealers are all independently franchised. So it's, conducted as their own business and they've bought into the Volkswagen license. So we have a head office budget and we divvy that up. Our out-of-home budget has been allocated according to a mixed media model percentage. So we're using that data to guide us, to tell us how much to stack on top of all the other channels that we're using. Then dealers are also make available their own budgets and they do their own marketing to market their own brand, not the Volkswagen brand. So particularly in bigger cities like Joburg where they are competing with each other. And then in the middle, we have like a co-op fund. So we have a certain pot of money available where dealers can apply for access to the fund. So if they come up with a good idea, there's a billboard right outside my dealership that's available. We think it's a good idea to buy it. We will then co-op. So it's like a cooperative spend, if that makes sense. So yeah, you pay half, I pay half.
In a world of endless screens, what really gets people to look up? Out of Home has the power to stop scrolls in the real world. At JCDecaux, we help brands turn moments on the move into measurable impact. From classic billboards to dynamic digital out of home, we connect your message with the audiences that matter.
You've mentioned that you are rebuilding your holding and you're working really hard on making sure that is right, strategically right for you and your business. But what I find quite interesting is in that latest state of out-of-home report from the audits that Outdoor Auditors does, where they go out in field and they audit all the out-of-home, roadside out-of-home, and they go out twice a year, and they went out in Feb and then they created a whole state of out-of-home report. In that report, cars, Liv mentioned it in her intro, cars is this number 2 biggest category of over 800 sites. But what's interesting is if you look at the next part of it, which is who are the top 25 advertisers, there was not one car brand listed there for number of sites. So what that tells me and what I can read from that data is that, yes, it might have now moved, right? I think it was third or fourth place, and it's now moved to take over retail banking, which was in the second position. Cars has now taken that over in the latest audit. So what that tells me is there's a lot more brands, but it's not in volume of sites. So to make up that 800 sites means that there's a good number of brands, each with, 5, 10, 19, 20 sites, that's making up those volume of over 800 sites that puts them into the second largest category, advertising and out of home. And I find that quite interesting, because then I think there's a double click into that where, you can buy the automotive category from Eric at Outdoor Auditors and really deep dive into how a car is advertising within the out of home landscape. But what I think would probably come up, and what I assume would come up quite big, is it might not be volume and number of sites, but it's size of sites. So fewer, but larger. And I think we can see that just in ourselves driving around, in South Africa or traveling around South Africa. Car brands, tend to really go, and a lot of these new brands that have entered the market have gone on these big, supersized sites.
Large format.
High impact sites. And I think that's because of exactly what you was talking about when we opened this episode, Bridget. We were talking about like how it gives a sense of big awareness, and it gives a sense of credibility for a new brand in a market. Out of home is known to build trust. It's great for trust building. And it's just interesting how we can see that playing out with not like a whole lot of small format sites. It's, a number of large sites that are being used. And I would love to get your take on that.
No, I think that's an extremely interesting point. I think it's probably a combination of the value of the sites and also the volume of new competitors. So as you're pointing out, there isn't one single one that's climbed onto that top 25 list, which is fascinating because there are so many new competitors, but also at the same time buying the big spectaculars. I mean, there's one extremely practical reason for why we buy the bigger sites, and that is that it's quite, like, impossible to do a car on a portrait format. So we're always going to choose landscape, always. And also to a certain degree, if you're spending, it's your second biggest purchase in your household, next to your bricks and mortar home, there is something about the stature of these big sites that is necessary, I think, for auto. You can't be these itty bitty little, tiny little, I always call them banners for ants, when you are trying to convince somebody to, spend north of R500,000 on a vehicle. So, and to your point, the trust building element that outdoor lends to brands, is amplified by that kind of scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I love that. And I completely agree. And you can see that a lot of the car brands lean towards those landscape formats. What's also nice about being on these larger sites is when you do innovation on them, how it just gives this double impact when you are adding innovation to some of those sites. What I'd love to get your take on is digital out of home, because I also wonder, if we're looking at that 800 in that second category, then being disseminated across many players, I wonder, so be that spectaculars would likely be a big piece, and then digital out of home playing quite a big piece in that too. Have you seen digital out of home work for your brand? Has it worked really well? Being able to perhaps focus on certain payday targeting, times of the year, bonuses, etc. I'm not sure if you've used it in that way.
We have used it in sort of, time bands, seasonality, times of the day, etc. My honest opinion is that digital out of home is extremely cluttered. I think there is something that I like about the old school static board, where it gives you the repetitiveness of seeing it every day on your commute. There's something to be said for that frequency, and you don't seem to get that same repetitiveness out of the digital out of home. So we use it a lot for retail marketing, as you pointed out, and use it programmatically, not as seasonal. There are 2 buying cycles annually for auto. So for the rest of it, it's not as seasonal as, ice cream or fashion would be. But yeah, to a degree, we do target it. How we've actually started approaching digital out of home now is almost treating it like static, because there's so much flying around it, and it's too tempting to make digital out of home a copy and paste of your social. So you're trying to tell a whole story, you're trying to build a storyline, you've got multiple frames that are animating, whatever. It doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work for us. So we've gone back now to basically a static frame, and then you use the digital feature of the billboard for things like, the lights, or maybe you have a person coming in. Or I saw one that was beautiful the other day that had someone's hair just flapping in the wind, just to catch your eye.
Yes, I saw that.
But as I say, while you're fighting your way through the Joburg traffic, you can't pick up on a whole storyline and a whole narrative and clever punchlines and multiple frames. It doesn't work. So we've gone backwards and using our digital out of home now almost like we're treating it like static.
There's almost like this impact around just having that slight animation being the first thing. The second thing is that I do get frustrated when I see brands that are advertising on digital out of home and you don't see who the brand is because there's no logo, or they don't keep the logo on throughout the ad, or then you've got a complete missed opportunity. So I think there's a benefit in having that still static imagery with slight animation, so that there's no question as to who the brand is. But I do think that it has to, for me, and for what I've always said around out of home, is that the creative should always be fit for purpose and fit for format. So it really depends on what, you're trying to communicate. What's the purpose? What's the strategic, reason that format's been included? Whether it be transit, whether it be mall, whether it be roadside, billboard, static, just out of home, like what's the purpose? And then obviously creating the creative fit for the format.
To your point, Bridget, I think that, it's one thing to say we need to be active and out of home, but how are we going to be active in the most purposeful way possible? And it is around, we want to see our sites that we're actually booking. What is the environment around the sites? Then from a creative point of view, we don't just want to be one of the 10 brands that are rotating on a digital site, but we actually want to stand out in the loop. How are we going to stand out in the loop? We're going to have only this partial animation. And I think that, there was a sense at the beginning that everybody must always be on digital and then always be on out of home. And what I'm seeing in the market now is a change of, yes, we're going to be in out of home, but we're going to have a combination of large format sites. As you mentioned, landscape works really well from an automotive perspective. Then we're going to have a mix of maybe medium size, and then we're going to use digital very intentionally. But we are going to use digital because it gives that flexibility. So I like how you've actually packaged that together around, it's not about throwing everything into digital out of home, and it's also not about not doing digital out of home at all. I think it's how can the media mix within the out of home selection complement one another. And a lot of brands are doing their big brand feel long-term holdings with your large format sites with the hero site, and then topping up with digital out of home tactically where it's needed for seasonality, for example. I wanted to change gears quickly and discuss creativity. We started the episode discussing how Bridget had recently attended the Cannes Festival, and it reminded me of the incredible campaign that VW did for the blind spot that was actually awarded in the outdoor ambient category in 2023 at Cannes. The most fantastic campaign that highlighted around the safety features of the car that was being advertised at the time, but so beautifully executed with this idea of the blind spot. And Bridget, I don't want to steal any of the thunder of the campaign, so I wonder if you could give us some background. Often what I love about these client point of view series is we get to hear from the marketing team what went on in the background to the campaign that we saw come to life.
That was a very exciting campaign and also meaningful for our team. And then a nice little reward at the end with our Lurie Grand Prix and also the recognition at Cannes. So basically, if you haven't seen it, the idea is that so much, the blind, when you're driving, there's a lot of danger in your blind spot, like a cyclist or a delivery van. So we used like US Army issue black paint. So it's the blackest paint that you can get. It absorbs 99% of all light, and built these two installations, I suppose. So like a sculpture of a guy on a bicycle, and the other one was a delivery guy, and they were painted in this absorptive black paint and mounted onto a black spot, so that when you looked at it head on, in certain light, if you were in full daylight, you'd be able to see the shadows. But so in a closed environment like a shopping center or dealerships, you just saw the black spot, and then you'd have to move around to actually see the cyclist or the object. And basically the whole idea is that, there's lots of danger in your blind spot. But Volkswagen and many other brands have a feature called blind spot monitor, which is that little light that shines up on your indicator mirror that will alert you of these dangers. And I think why it was meaningful for us, it was year one of a sort of a safety message that we embarked on, because I think as a team we delved. When we launched Night School, we delved a little bit into the road fatalities in South Africa, and it's quite alarming. I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware, we've got one of the worst death rates in the world for vehicular accidents. So we just sort of thought that is our space, and as an auto brand, what can we do to kind of raise awareness? So yes, it's to sell cars, and it's to raise awareness of a feature that the cars that your VW comes with, but it's also to raise awareness of all of these dangers that surround us on the roads all the time. So that was placed at a few different kind of pop-up events. We had it in a few dealerships, in some shopping centers, etc.
I love that campaign. We will link it in the episode, just to kind of bring that real world problem. How do you solve for this and make such an impactful message? I think I love that, you had to look twice to see what was actually being communicated here. What is there in this black spot? And as you said, in the video, you'll see, as you kind of pan, you see from the side, oh, there is actually an object in this black spot. And I think that it was a fantastic campaign. I love that it was part of your series around road safety. You guys also did the Night School campaign, which I think is also really interesting, around focusing on, how do you learn to drive at night? I think is also really important. So I love that campaign. It speaks to the creativity that we see coming from VW. I know in more recent years, we've seen Eyes Where You Need Them campaign that happened recently. That was such a fun campaign for me, where you basically had eyes fit to the bottom of your foot before you stood on a rake, for example. And it was speaking around, the cameras located around your car. And I don't know if you want to touch on that campaign while we're sticking with creativity and the amazing work you guys have been doing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, creativity is our favorite topic, because otherwise we're just in the sea of sameness of, car and a price point. So we really do try and differentiate with creative, emotive work that always puts people at the center. So this is a very cute campaign for Amarok. So there's a camera under the car. And the whole thinking is, when you 4x4ing and you're going up a hill, you actually sometimes are using blind faith, because you have no idea what's going to be on the other end of that hill. And it's sort of using that insight of, everybody stepped on Lego in the middle of the night. If you have a toddler, you would have done it. And to just go, damn, if only I had eyes there, where the problem is potentially coming. So there's a few different executions. There's Lego, there's a rake, there's some glass underwater at the beach. There's a nail on a floorboard, and it's just saying, like, wouldn't it be great if we had an undercar or an underfoot camera like the Amarok does? Just a cheeky little idea, and by the way, no AI. That was actually shot. Those were people's eyes that were shot underwater, and feet that were shot, and just a cheeky little execution. And I think, again, to circle back to my firm opinion about outdoor, is that it has to be the simplest of ideas. And as I said, everyone can relate to standing on that piece of Lego, and you have to be able to grasp the concept within the 2 seconds as you whiz past the billboard. So I think that's the beauty in that execution. There's no big explanation of the USP. We just say there's a camera under the car, the end.
I know we're heading towards the end. We started this episode with congratulating you on the partnership with the Sharks. And you gave us a little hint that there's going to be some ambient out-of-home placements or some ambient work. Can you give us a teaser, or do we all have to just keep our eyes peeled as things progress?
You have to keep your Amarok eyes peeled. I'll share one little thing with you. And it's not unique at all. It's been done in a million sports sponsorships around the world, but we are going to have the tee will be delivered on field. So every try that the Sharks score, there'll be a little Amarok, a little remote controlled Amarok with the rugby ball that will get delivered on field. So just a way of, again, building that frequency of the VW sponsorship. So every time there's a try, our Amarok will get to be on field and get that kind of sort of repetitive awareness. So as I say, it's not an original idea, but it's very cute.
I look forward to seeing the little Amarok car driving around. We are heading towards the close of our episode. And just before we close, and as our closing question, I think we have touched on creativity throughout the episode, as well as various other things. And I think that I'd like to close off by asking you, Bridget, can you share with us any campaigns that you've seen locally or globally that excite you, that make you excited about what out of home can offer, or campaigns that have really stood out to you?
I think my favorite from Cannes was not the Grand Prix, which was that Mercado Libre. There was that barcode on the field, which I thought was absolute genius idea, but that's not the one that tickled me. I really loved the Could Have Been a Heineken campaign, which is basically using the insight that people leave such long voice notes to each other that it could have been an opportunity to meet in the real world and have a beer. And the use of outdoor in that execution was just genius, I think, and scalable. And that's where it's so difficult to have such a creatively driven campaign, but at such scale. So they used the visual of the voice note, which we all you can look at that, we instantly know that that's a voice note. So, for example, and the train goes past and there's just the voice note, and then right at the end could have been a Heineken. I just thought that was such a simple insight, and the use of outdoor for a completely 360 campaign that drove sales, that drove talkability, drove awareness. It's sort of like the trifecta of everything that you want out of a campaign. Drove brand love, but also, because there was a redemption mechanism, drove sales. So that one just ticked every single box. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, I love that campaign, and I completely agree with you. I think a campaign that starts off with something that you all nod along saying, yes, okay, we've all sent those long voice notes to each other. And I just love the brand truth of, right, you could have got together with your friend, right, rather than having sent this long message. So yeah, you've left us with some amazing inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been amazing to sit down with you. You've got such a wealth of knowledge and experience in the marketing and media space. And thank you so much for sharing with us today and for giving us little sneak peeks of what to look out for. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed today's episode. Thank you.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you to the sponsor of today's episode. Your support helps make Beyond the Billboard possible and helps us to bring you the first and only out-of-home podcast in South Africa.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1,